Welcome to another episode of an intimate conversation with women of color. I am your host, Deneen L. Garrett. And for Hispanic Heritage Month, I've actually been doing throwbacks to HHM 2020. So today's episode is with Josy Laza Gallagher. Josy is Afro-Cubana, and she's going to talk about her experience growing up in Cuba and then moving to the East Coast and what that was like for her. For those of you who are committed to elevating the voices of women of color, thank you so much. Please continue to watch on YouTube and or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe to the channels if you haven't already done so, and share with others. Because as you know, my goal is to reach millions of women of color, and in order to do so, I need your help. So get ready for today's throwback. Hey, Josy, welcome to an intimate conversation with women of color. How are you?
Fine. Thank you so much, Janine. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you and to learn more about your journey. So again, thank you for joining. So I want to introduce you to our listeners. Our guest is Josy Laza Gallagher. She has a master's. She uses her pronouns are she, her, and ella, representing her Latina culture. She is a global inclusion consultant and executive coach. And she's also a board member of HACE, which is the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement. And that's actually how we met. So we were at the annual leadership conference last year together, and we've met and we've been connected ever since then. So Josy, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Yes, I was just remembering that we had met at that, and this year had to be virtual, right?
Right.
So let me tell you a little bit about my life journey. I like to say that I did a different type of journey in that I was born in the United States. And when I was 6 months old, my parents went back to Cuba, and usually that's not the direction people from Cuba take. And so they could figure out that I'm have a couple of years on me, because at that time, my father was legal. I was born here, and my mother was not. So immigration was kind enough to say that they needed to go back to Cuba to fix their papers, and then they would be allowed back in. And so we went back when I was 6 months, and they took about a year to get everything together, and then they returned. But that at the time, and this is really aging myself, no one spoke Spanish in New York City. Very few people, which is amazing when you think of it today. And since both my parents had to work outside the home, they decided that it would be best for me to stay in Cuba and be raised for a while with both our families, so my mother's side and my father's side. And so that is why I then came back to New York City when I was 5.5 years old, and which is probably why I feel so very Cuban. And those first early years are very influential in how you see yourself and others. And I also can empathize with that whole immigrant experience, because even though I was born here, when I came back, I didn't speak English. I was really, the one thing, it's so funny, the one thing I remember was that the milk tasted really different. I was like 5 years old, and had to learn to try to assimilate as much as I could. And I learned to do, I didn't know it was called that, but that code switching. Back then, we lived in a very white Irish neighborhood, and we were probably only a few people of color. And I went to Catholic school, so when I was in my house, I could be who I was, and when I walked out of my house, I had to lower the volume of who I was. My mother was mulata, what we call mulata, so she was very mixed, light skin with straight hair. My father was a very tall black Cubano, and in his family there was actually Chinese mix, and so that's who I am. I come from. I don't feel I have to choose. Am I Latina or Black, because as you know, the one is a race and Black is a race, and the fact that I'm Latina is my ethnicity. And I just feel wonderful, and I love my experiences growing up in a Cuban house. Because even though we lived in New York, when you walked into my house, it was very Cubano. You know, I mean, I had like two Irish girlfriends, that early Irish American girlfriends that loved to come to my house, and I always said, I think they love to come for the rice and beans and the music and stuff, because it was very clear we always associated with Cuban friends. I did my quinceañera, you know, that's our coming out as a young lady. So it was very Cuban, even though we were living in New York City. So
Yeah.
that's my background.
Yeah, and what a rich background it is, because again, so you being Cuban, so you have, one parent who's mulata, one parent who's Black. So that there, I'm sure that different experiences, right? You were
Yep.
with both families, so I'm sure the
Yes.
experience of that was different. And then New York in itself. So that adds a whole nother
Right.
and
Right.
layer, right? And then in an Irish American neighborhood, that's a whole another
Right.
layer. So I want to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But before we get there, why is it important for women of color to have a platform to use their voices?
Well, we are it. We are, you know, we're homeowners, we're small business owners, we're breadwinners, we keep the family together, we make decisions about healthcare. They've done some statistics about that, about the women. We are entrepreneurs, single parents, we're caregivers. You know, we're really the backbone of this country. And in terms of politics, we are a very consistent voting bloc. You know, as you probably know, 94% of Black women voted for Hillary Clinton. That we showed up more than anybody else. And so it's important for us to have a platform. One of the things that I pride myself in is really trying to help, in my case, Afro Latinas, to have that voice and seat at the table and be there when crucial decisions are made. You know, be in the room, as Hamilton said, be in the room where the decisions are being made. Because even though sometimes I get tired of hearing how big our community is, and then
Mm,
compared to where we are in terms of politics and decision making, it pales, right? We have big numbers, but we're not in the strategic places. And so I think we have to, and I think I know for myself, I know we're all experiencing what Mary Frances Winters calls Black fatigue, and
mm,
I certainly am. But we can't let our guard down.
yeah.
We have to continue to be resilient and keep getting our voices out there and advocating for our sons, our daughters. So yes, I think it's very important that we're like I said, we're the backbone. We're a very important group of people. We need everybody else to realize it as well.
Yes, absolutely. And what you just said about the Black fatigue and continuing and keep fighting. Every day on Facebook, I make sure I post something about Black Lives Matter, right? Every day
Mm-hmm.
you can go on social media and you'll see something that's happening to us, happening
Right.
against
Yes.
us.
Yes.
You can scroll and you could have looked at something that made you
Right.
smile and laugh, and then the next one is something that
Yep.
just makes you just extremely furious
Oh,
and
yeah.
breaks your heart. And so I make sure, because I want to keep that out there. I don't want people to forget, because I think that
Yes.
that's what has happened. Like
Yeah.
our experiences, our journeys continue to get co-opted, and
Yep.
we keep getting pushed back, right? So it's because of us that we have the civil rights that we have, and
Right.
others have the rights that they have because of what we started. But yet, as time continues to go on, we keep getting pushed back further and further. And what's going on now, the murder of George Floyd, as we know,
Yeah.
that wasn't the first one. There's been
Right.
several since then, right?
Oh,
And there
right.
will
Right.
right and there will continue to be. And part of it is because no one is really tackling head on the issues, the why,
Yeah.
because it's so big, it's huge. It's kind of like
Right.
what you said with the Hispanic community. The numbers are there, large numbers, but when you really break it and peel back, they're small, because then you pull away, you have Cubans, you have Nicaraguans, you
Right.
have, you have Costa Ricans, you have all these different people that may even have their own challenges against one another.
And
So,
yes,
right?
definitely,
So
definitely.
so
Yep.
that's part of it as well. Like, yeah, you have that large number, but they're not together. And
Right.
even in a Black community, and just really in marginal, a lot of marginalized communities, that you may have the numbers, but we're not necessarily together systematically, like it was
Right.
intended for it
Right.
to be broken up the way it is.
And I
So,
really think it's almost strategic the way they keep every week one or two things to bring us down.
mm-hmm,
And like you said, I mean, you have your head up, and then boom, two more
yep,
things happen.
yes,
And I think it's very strategic the way that's happening. So that's why we cannot let
mm-hmm,
it get to us, and we have to
yes,
get some strength from whatever,
yes,
to be able to stay and as you said, keep it in front of us, because I think that that is happening. Things are going on, and then people just don't want to deal with it anymore.
right,
Even our
right.
own people. I mean, it's
Oh, for
like,
sure.
um,
I mean, it's
yeah,
exhausting.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is exactly, as
yeah,
Mary Frances Winter's book,
yeah.
exhausting. I mean, it is exhausting, and I even think about the quote from James Baldwin, like, if you're, to be Negro and somewhat conscious, it's a
Yes,
daily state of
yes,
rage.
yes,
And
yes.
really it is.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Every
it is.
day.
But
Yeah.
we have to see that we will win. We
Yes.
will make this happen. I mean, there
Yeah.
have been, and in true honor, I think we're forgetting some of the progress that has
Hmm.
happened, and some of the things that we did see in the beginning, and we're still seeing the advocacy from different groups, the wanting to learn more,
Yes.
and actually understanding what it's like to be us, and then having that empathy and giving people some space. So I think, and I see lots of, every time I go on LinkedIn, somebody else has been, a new position, high level, either
Yes.
Black or Latina, and my hope is, I'm glad to see that. Now I hope that
Hmm.
they have the resources
Yes.
required to make change, systemic change within their organization, and that it's not just, okay, we have now this, Black
Right. It's
person.
just not performative. It's not
Right,
just for show.
right.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. And that is true. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of value in it. And it's
Yeah.
beautiful to see, like, I'm making sure that I'm celebrating everybody. Like, I think
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
Savoy, I follow them on LinkedIn. It's like, anytime, oh, such and such has been appointed to
Right,
the board.
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Celebrate,
Yeah.
because we do have to celebrate ourselves.
Yes.
Part of me is thinking, the way I look at it is, this should have been happening all along, so that
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not like a
Yeah.
whole celebration, right? But it
Right.
wasn't. and
But it
and
wasn't.
it's okay, because the time is now, and we just have to keep
Exactly.
with this momentum. So, yes.
Exactly. Okay. We digress, but it's the moment.
Oh, it is absolutely the moment. And no, and that is absolutely part of the conversation, because these are ways that we're using our voices,
Right.
right? And the voice for me is really just an expression. So whether you're actually saying it, whether you're actually writing it, you mentioned Hamilton, so creative.
Yeah.
However, it's an expression, and that's how I look at using
Hmm.
your voice. So right now it's Hispanic Heritage Month. We actually have about another week. So
Hmm.
it's September 15 through October 15. During this time, we celebrate the rich culture and contributions of Hispanics during Hispanic Heritage Month.
Right.
So, as a Cuban American Afro Latina, how do you celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month?
Well, I was thinking about that, and I know I discussed a little bit with you, but I actually am not doing. I'm not that different. I'm doing. It's not just for Hispanic Heritage Month that I show up.
Yeah.
I'm showing up all the time. I'm showing up more. So this is what I'm doing differently. I'm agreeing to a couple of panel participation, even though I'm like overwhelmed with work. But I
Mm,
feel that I feel this is part of my responsibility to represent, and to the use of self, for people to see me and understand what it's like to be a Afro Latina, and to see what I'm doing. But other than that, I am celebrating my Afro Latina-ness all the time. I am, talking about it. I am educating folks in a way that they can hear it. I always talk about, we want to educate and not humiliate, because people will say, "What, you speak Spanish? Oh, I thought you were black. Oh, so then you're not
Yeah.
black." People have actually said to me, "Then you're not black." I said, "Well, the last time I looked at myself, I was black." But they can't, and I don't, I don't want to shame anybody, because I don't blame them when I realize who they see as
Hmm.
role models of a Latina in the
Hmm.
media, magazines and TV. They don't look like me. So is there any wonder that they are surprised when I tell them that I'm Afro Latina? And then if they know a little bit about Latinas, they'll say, "Oh, you must be Dominican."
Mm.
Because that's in the Dominican group, they see more blacks. So I'm educating, and I even tell them we have our own Oprah. We had anyway, and her name is Christina. She's not around that much now, but she's blonde and blue-eyed. So I'm not shaming anyone to that they don't understand. So I'm using that platform, as you know, I'm a consultant, so I'm out there, I'm facilitating. There's been lots of times when people have come up to me, other Latinas and mainly other Afro Latinas, to say they were so glad to see me in the front of the room, because
Yeah.
it's very rare to see one of us up there. So I'm always trying to be up there and show up and represent, and then also, with coaching, and whether it's a formal coaching relationship or an informal, in terms of how to help our Latinas and Afro Latinas be, as I said before, in place of decision making, and how to show up. I mean, things like, to bust the stereotypes. Oh, so we're loud, and we're too colorful, and I say, well, I don't want you to flex to the point of losing who you are, but you do have to be mindful of your goal. So if your goal is to convince somebody, or to sell a product, or to get a job, you want to do a lay of the land, look and see what's the norm here, and maybe flex a bit until you own, and you have the credibility to show up fully who you are, which is what we're helping organizations create environments so that you can do that, right? But some of them are not there right now. So anything that might get in the way or distracting of your message, of what you want to convey, you might want to, rethink that and just flex a bit. I mean, at this point, if you were looking at me now, I mean, I love color, so I'm wearing pumpkin color blouse. I love jewelry, so I wear it, but I am mindful. Like if I'm going somewhere, I'll maybe not wear a charm bracelet, for instance. Maybe I'll wear a bangle so that it's not making that. Those kinds of things I think are important. But we want to be able to show that we have, and the other piece is to be proud of who you are, because I've been with a lot of, especially light skin or white Latinas who can pass, and are not very open about their Hispanic heritage.
Hmm.
And I think we need to celebrate. It's not either or. It's not American or Latin. Celebrate the duality. We bring the culture. We bring the language. We bring some of the leadership competencies that we're seeing now are some things that are inherent in most, not everybody, but in a lot of people within the Latino community, in terms of being able to speak to all different groups. If you go to a Latino party, you'll see a 6-month-old up to a 101-year-old lady, and we're able to really converse across generations. We're very humble in that we understand what we need from others. We want to help others. We're, very generous in terms of wanting to help others succeed, because we're very much team oriented. We do collaborative work, which is one of the things that we're talking about. So show that up. Show what it means to have a Latina or Latino in your business, and how we can help the bottom line. Just by marketing, just by looking at our population, you want to help them understand. You want to market to our group, and I can help you figure out what messages people will listen to. for instance. So yeah, that's how I'm showing up. I
Right. You're
just want
showing
to
up as you every
emphasize,
day.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
not just for this month. I mean, this month maybe I'm doing a couple of different things,
Right. Right.
but really we have to just show up every day. That's how I'm proud. I want people to know and learn about who I am and what I bring.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's for me, my questions are about that, about who you are and how you show up. So, as we already talked about and mentioned that your mom, mulata, and your dad black.
Hmm.
So in Cuba, what does that mean? Now you mentioned your
Hmm.
mom being light skinned, fair skinned, mixed, and your dad being black. So actually I want to kind of start with that. So in Cuba, your dad being black means what exactly?
Well, again, a little bit different story of their family, but and a lot of people in the Latin community, and I'll just say Cuba, will say, no, we don't
Mm-hmm.
have racism here. We're not racist. Look at my family. We have every
Mm-hmm.
color, which is well, my family has every color, and yet we are racist. And when
Mm-hmm.
they were in their era, there was open racism. I'm a caregiver for an elderly. I call her my aunt. She's actually not my aunt, but this is again how we are in terms of the how we see family. It's extended. She doesn't have anybody else, and she was always with my family. And she tells me she's 87 about stories of people even intermar when people were marrying either lighter or darker, how the mother wouldn't want the dark son-in-law to come to the house. And so there was a lot of racism, and people don't want to admit it sometimes. But in my father's, so there's also the socioeconomic piece. My
Mm-hmm.
father's family was actually upper middle class,
Okay.
and my mother's family was more lower middle class. So that's unusual because he was the
Yeah.
dark one, right? And
Right.
somehow, and I tried to understand the story. I had still one half brother alive to tell me how he did that, because it was amazing that this black man rose up in where what he was doing to be a landowner and have big house and farms, etc. Before Castro came and took that away. And so I grew up. I was there because I was a little kid, and I said I grew up half the time I was with that family and half with my other family. My father's family comes from the province of Matanzas, and my mother's family comes from the capital of Havana. And so I could see the difference even from a financial point of view. But they, among themselves, have racist tendency, even to this day, because I still have a lot of family. They'll talk about some of our sayings are very telling, and we're not even, we don't even realize it about, oh, bad hair, pelo malo, black bad hair, or don't go out. I remember my mother saying, don't go out in the sun too much because you're gonna get black as
Yeah.
tar. I mean, she actually, said my older son looks a lot like me. My younger son doesn't, but she actually said to me, "Oh my goodness, I don't know. Your stomach must have been dirty because he was born so dark." And it's
Okay.
like, and so you could see, right? They're saying no, there's no racism, but yes, there is. And one
Yeah.
of the things that's very interesting to me when I've gone to Cuba many times before this pandemic is how come we do have a lot of intermarriages, and we do have, and yet people are still into the color and the whole colorism is very
Mm.
alive and well. The lighter you are, like in a lot of other places, the better off. If you have straight hair, it's better. So even within my own family, they'll say things like, "Oh, look at that negrito," and I'll say, "Hello,
Mm.
hello, me, I'm here." They
Right.
don't even realize it, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I do say is that we have to start within our own families, because there's a lot of racism within the Latino community, and we have to. And by starting, I mean like when they say something like that, say, "Okay, wait, time out, help me understand," and do it with love. We don't want to
Yes.
humiliate, but start there in helping them understand, because a lot of times they're not even aware of the history. People don't realize that there are black people in all of the Latin American countries, and sometimes they don't
Mm-hmm.
even realize that. So yes, there is racism. I did see it, but I didn't. The only thing that I can now understand is that I didn't have the talk you know how we're talking about the African American parents have,
Mm-hmm.
because my parents didn't really know. My mother didn't. My father actually went to school for 2 years here in the States, Tuskegee, as a matter of fact.
Mm.
And there was such overt racism that he would come to New York City to a family that he knew on weekends to get away from that. So he did experience some of that here, but in Cuba, I think the social economic piece
Yeah,
trumped,
outweighed.
yeah, trumped
Mm-hmm.
for him because he was the
Yeah,
darker. And then my mother's side, she, again, was lighter skinned, and my aunt is even lighter than she was. And the only thing is that, and they all loved me, and I grew up in a loving environment, and yet they can talk about Black people.
right, right. And and what you're talking about is that exists anytime there are the different complexions.
Hmm.
Whenever you have lighter and darker people, you have the form of colorism. It's just at different degrees, right? Depending on where,
Right,
in
right,
Cuba, in Central America, because I understand it's, just as bad or terrible in
yeah.
Dominican Republic,
Oh
right? So they
yeah,
have a
yeah,
thing against
yeah.
Haitians and
Right, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, right. So, all of that definitely exists in a lot of different places. It's just different degrees, even
Right.
amongst African Americans. We had
Oh
that with
yes,
the
yeah.
paper bag test back in the day.
Right,
People don't
right,
necessarily talk about it. I don't know that people necessarily go by that as much anymore, but there was a time
right,
that you did. And
right.
again, it was probably the darker, and again, in different countries, the darker folks, if you had the money, that kind of
Right.
outweighed everything else. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're talking a lot about your pride for Cuba, and there's a word for it. What is that word for it?
I just
Is it
lost you a little bit.
Cubanismo?
Oh,
Pride for
cubanismo,
Cuba?
cubanismo,
Cubanismo. Okay.
cubanismo, cubanismo.
And that's what that's what you've been talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's who and how you show up every day.
yeah. I like to say, I'm Cubana. We say de pura cepa, which means from the pure roots. And sometimes my Cuban family, gets upset because I said, "No, you're Americana, you're American because you were
Mm,
born here." And I said, "No, but I was raised in Cuba," and
right.
so I was very much entrenched into my Cuban background. And ironically, as you've noticed, my last name is Gallagher. I always, when I do my diversity stuff, I always say I bring new meaning to the term Black Irish because now I'm married to an Irishman, and I keep that Lassa there because I have to say with pride that he's adapted more of my culture. And so he loves his rice and beans, he loves his espresso coffee, he even does a little bit of salsa, because that's who I am. And my kids too. I mean, I have my music going, and I love cooking, I love having people over. That whole I was thinking about a song that Celia Cruz has that really, it's a really great metaphor of we keep bringing people in. So she has a song about a soup, and people keep knocking on the door, and she says, "Okay, we'll just pour some more water in the soup," and then it goes out, knock on. Okay, we'll pour some more water in the soup. So the idea is, it doesn't matter. We have an open house. Mi casa es tu casa is really very much my way of being and what I saw in my family. And if people come to sleep over and there's no room, we put a mattress on the floor, and people, which is not, his family is not like that, very
Hmm.
more decorum and you have to call before you come. With my family, you just come.
Just show up.
So that's cubanismo, that's pride. I think you realize my email address has for Cuba, my
Yes.
license plate has for Cuba. I have my flag. Now that I'm doing Zoom, people can see my flag here. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So I actually did visit Cuba a couple years ago.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah, my son's school went on a trip, and I remember two things. One, where we stayed, and as a matter of fact, the hotel we stayed at was right by the Russian embassy.
Oh, yes.
So
I was
yeah,
by the Malecón there, by the water, right?
yes,
Near that.
yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we kept seeing people go to the water, and they were putting stuff in the water,
Oh.
and and I believe that they were paying
Oh.
homage to a
Oh,
deity
yes.
to
Yes. Now when you said that. Yep. Oh, yes.
yes.
Santeria and the Orishas. Yeah.
Yes, and so and then I saw a lot of people walking around in white. So those are
Mm-hmm.
people who
Mm-hmm.
practice Orisha and Santorini.
Well, those are people
So,
who have committed to become one of the, I guess, uh, clergy within that. So you have to wear white for a year,
mm,
and then you have a ceremony that initiates you into that particular, and you pick a saint, one of the orishas, and that's who
okay.
you follow. But one of the things I want, so I'm glad you saw that and experienced that, because the other piece of who I am is this duality also. I'm Catholic. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through college even. And in my house, especially my father, we practice the Orishas. By practice, I mean, we celebrated Santa Barbara is Saint Barbara's, but you know that in the Orishas, I don't know if you know much about it, but every saint, Catholic saint, there's an Orisha counterpartner there. So that,
Okay.
and the slaves did that when they came from Africa and Brazil, so that the Spaniards wouldn't, because they want to convert everybody
Mm,
to Catholicism.
mm-hmm.
And so they named some of the Orishas Catholic names. So, for instance, St. Barbara is Shango, and that's like the highest Orisha there is. And then the patron saint of Cuba is La Caridad del Cobre, that's the Virgin. And then she's uh, um, her sister, which is La Virgen de Regla, is Yemaya, and La Caridad de Cobre is Oshun. So you see these names,
Mm-hmm.
but so we have the two. So my father was always very careful for me not to say anything, because I went to Catholic schools. God knows what the nuns would have done, because in those days they could do physical
Yeah.
abuse. But I grew up in that, and for me, that's okay. To have both my Orishas and Santeria side, as well as Catholicism. And I have, if you come to my house again, I have a little altar, and I have my saints, and I'm sure you saw that throughout Cuba. I mean, not only, and you saw the necklaces that people wear, and the colors
Mm-hmm.
have a meaning to the saints. So it's that duality that it's almost the same as being able to have the duality of the American culture and then the Latino culture, and being able to be fluid and be able to go back and forth, which I think is a good thing. I
Yeah.
think I don't want to be put in one little box and say this is the
Yes.
way you have to be.
Yes. And so, you know what, with the whole thing with the boxes, it is hard, because we have been put into boxes. And
Yes.
so, like now you have BIPOC, and it's like, okay, well, what exactly is that?
Hmm. Right.
That's
Right.
Black and Indigenous people of
Right.
color, but what
Right.
about the others? Like,
Right. Right.
what are we doing with the terms? And
Yes.
do we really just need to get to the place where, okay, this person is Cuban, this person is Mexican, or Cuban
Right.
American, Mexican American, etc., instead of throwing everybody into the boxes, because the boxes we didn't create the boxes.
Right. Right. Right.
We were put into boxes, and I see people are kind of like trying to break out of it, kind of like slowly. And I believe that that's what the BIPOC is doing.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about it, and I haven't really looked into it, but then I'm just wondering, well, why was it whomever, why did they choose the Black and the Indigenous, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, and
that's
there's
something
a
I want
lot
to
of
know about.
yeah, there's a lot of passion around that, and Latinx even. Like
Yeah, yeah, well,
I
yes.
particularly am not into Latinx, even though I know the
Mm-hmm.
reason why is they thought they were being more inclusive, right? For
Mm-hmm.
especially our LGBTQ. And then some of us feel that then it erases the women, right?
Yeah.
Because in the Spanish language it's either a or o for it's gender based, some of the words. So I'm not still very comfortable with that, even though I use the terms interchangeably, especially
Mm-hmm.
if I'm teaching. And then the part about indigenous, I have a colleague who's Guatemalan, and she is a big advocate of the indigenous piece, and that's something that I have to educate myself more on. But that she thought that was good to have that included, because they get erased, you know.
Yeah.
And so if it's to raise awareness, I'm okay with that. But then within that, even when I'm teaching, I teach cultural competence. Even when I'm teaching that, I say, there's a lot of books and data about some norms within the different cultures, but you always have to check it and validate it with the person in front of you. Because just because they say they're, they're from, I don't know, China, it doesn't mean that they have those cultural values. Because the information was put together based on a bell curve, which says the data talks about most people in that particular group have these characteristics, but there are some outliers, right? So I could have been raised in China, and if you saw me, you would have thought I was more like a black person. And then,
Mm-hmm.
but I could have more association with the Chinese culture if I was raised there. So
Right.
the important thing is not to make an assumption, but to check in with that. And that's, I think, with these terms, yeah, they're okay if you want to do a short script, but you really need to honor whatever that person feels is how they want to be identified, right?
Exactly. How
Um,
that individual. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, if all for me, it would be Afro-Cuban because
Mm-hmm.
Cuban is very important, and definitely not Hispanic because for some of us that's really represents Spain and our oppressor and white, right? It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't honor the many hues, colors, background that we have. But everybody, is different about that. So I think if it's raising awareness, okay with that. But I think, to honor that person, need to check in with them in terms of so what works for you.
Right, absolutely. And so, before I go to the next question, I do want to mention that um, I want to learn more about the African religion. So I think
Oh,
I'll, start with, yeah. So I'll start
mm-hmm.
with Orisha. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So it's
Thank you for
Orisha
that.
or Santeria. So if you
Yes,
have you could always give me a call. I don't know
thank you.
everything because, my father hid a lot from me because he didn't
Hmm.
want me to talk about it. But
To
as an
get out, yeah.
adult, I've learned more and now understand some of the things I saw. And when I was in Cuba, I actually picked up a few books on that to learn a little bit more about the different orishas. So if I could even, suggest some
Okay.
things to read. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we talked a lot, and it's no, we talked a lot about a lot of
Right,
things,
right. A lot of
and
stuff
it's
going on.
right, a lot of wonderful stuff, which is exactly what I wanted to have happen. I wanted to
Yeah,
learn more because it's interesting to me, right? What I do, my career is in diversity and inclusion in this
right.
particular Hispanic Latino segment,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
it's so many different layers, and it's
Yeah.
all. I love to learn about people and the differences with people, right? And
Yeah.
like you said, probably a person looks at you, so they're going to tell you who you are, what you are. Then you
Yeah.
open your mouth and like, wait a minute, she sounds
Right.
a little different.
Right.
You know what I'm
Exactly.
saying? So
Exactly. Yeah.
and so people have to be open to understand, like, you can't look at a person and know everything about them,
Right. Make an
you know
assumption. Yeah.
no,
No.
and like you're saying, a lot of and that's key and important. And because, again, with various cultures, like with people who are biracial, the black community, like, no,
Yes.
you're black,
Yes.
because they
Yes.
did that. But
Right.
and so we picked it up, well, no, you're black, but why can't that person be both? Like, if their parent,
Right.
they have a
Right.
white parent and a black parent, they're both, like, they don't
Right.
have to choose one, they're both. And it's
Yeah.
just a matter of respecting. Okay, so
Yeah,
as I was
just on
saying.
that, I just wanted to point out that because we look like the Bennington family if you saw us. So my younger son is very light skinned. He looks like me if you look really close, but he's so light skinned that people really don't know what he is. And I lived in Switzerland for 9 years, and he was actually born there. And
Oh my
I
goodness.
had my friend came in, the first one to come see me, and she says, "I don't want to understand. You're black, Rick's white, and Christopher's Chinese because he." Looked very Asian. And remember, I said I had Asian in my family,
Yeah.
Chinese, and it skips. And so the people never know how to classify him. But I remember him saying that in the census way back,
Hmm.
he didn't have a box to check
Hmm.
because you had to make a choice. I mean, now at least there are more choices and people can put in the biracial. But to your point, yeah, I mean, he doesn't have to say he's white or black. He can pick, and then he has, of course, the Latino piece. But yeah, people, and now I have grandkids that one is redhead and the other one is blonde, and people look at me like, what? What's going on here? And And so we have to, we have to feel comfortable in that discomfort, and to understand that we're not, it is what it is, and we're not, there's no box and there's no label, and we are who we are. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to point that biracial piece, because he's said to me lots of times in the past where, he didn't want to check in any box because it didn't, address him, who he was.
Well, that's the conversation I had last week. My friend, she's her mom is from Costa Rica, her dad is Black.
Uh-huh.
And if she didn't find herself represented, she didn't check anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
if
then
she
we
had
lose
the
out. Yeah.
opportunity, she wrote in, not necessarily the census, but just in general, right?
Right, right.
But yeah, so there's all of that, because honestly, your son isn't biracial, because bi,
No,
that's
no, true. Right.
he's
I know.
multi. So
Right, right.
yeah,
Exactly. Yep.
yeah. So how are you using your voice for women of color and to amplify the contributions of Latinas?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. So I recognize that I have the privilege of being in front of people all the time. And so, and being that voice, if somebody is not there, to help them be there. And so whether it's in my conversations or in my workshops, talking about um, people, how we have contributed to, in cases of organization, the bottom line, and how we have the competencies that now are being seen as leadership competency. So I do a lot of talking about that. And I think I also, with the coaching, I help women find their voice, and help them, because we have a lot of good things in our culture, but there's a lot of stuff that also might get in the way of being who we are. And I think about myself. I mean, my father was very progressive in one sense, that he said education was key. And so I knew I was going to go to college before I even left grammar school, which was different from some of my white girlfriends, where especially if there were boys in the house, the college was, for the boys. But my father was very progressive in that, and yet he said, and so you could be a teacher or a nurse, right?
Mm,
And messages that I received were, well, keep your head down and don't make waves, and work super hard, and that whole meritocracy bit that I know as I grew older. That's not how it works. I mean, you have to work hard, and you have to know people, you have to network, you have to show your worth, you have to speak up. And for some of us, that doesn't come naturally, especially I coach it, and it's still sometimes hard to speak up, because it's so ingrained, that whole message of not speaking up, keeping your head low, not asking for help, right? Because God forbid they might think that I'm not good enough. And so I think in my coaching, helping women find their voice, and helping them see that they are worth it, that they are valuable, that they have something to contribute. And then, helping them practice, and actually going over a situation. So I think I recognize that I do have that privilege, because I'm in front of a lot of people. And then just showing up, quite
yeah,
frankly,
yeah,
just having them see me in that position. I mean, even with my when I did this session I told you this morning for Spain as a webinar, but last year I went, because that's how we should have done it. And they were also talking about there's no racism, ha ha ha, because I lived in
right.
Europe, so I know. And they were, kind of curious, and you keep thinking, well, goodness, I mean, they see the world, they see. And so that whole thing of accepting me, and then some of the things that you could hear is, oh, but you're different,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're Black, but you're different. And then so that's an education moment
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Let's unpack that, because actually I have a lot of friends who look like me, who are like me. And so what did you mean by that? So
Right.
that's, the conversation to have, again, in a loving way,
Mm-hmm.
to help people, to I say, hijack that bias, right? To nudge a little bit. But that's how I help. I'm hoping at this point in my life, I want to pay forward. So I want to give as much advice as I can, just based on my experience, um, and do. I have to say, it's been more difficult these days. I mean, there were some weeks that people were just calling me, just friends and colleagues, to give them some coaching, and it was hard for me to even coach them because of the situation that was going on, right?
Right.
But again, I am a very spiritual person, so I do pray, and
Hmm.
that's what gives me some of my strength. And I believe very much in my Orishas, like I
Yeah.
say, and I know that they're protecting me. And I do every morning. Grateful for getting up, and I do my grateful messages at night, and I think that's important. So that yeah, that's how I try to. I have, and my older son, who looks a lot like me, he's been in a lot of pain because
Mm.
of what's going on. He lives in Indianapolis, uh, and that's for me that's scary.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to help him also with what's going on as a black young man.
Right. Right. I recall a couple years ago my son playing AAU basketball, and we drove from Detroit to Indianapolis, and wherever they were playing, where we had to drive through to get there, I was like, oh my God, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then
Yep.
but Indianapolis itself, at least for the few hours that we were there
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
downtown, of course,
Yeah, and that's what he says to me.
different.
But mom, yeah, the sun. I said, yeah, I know. But if you walk out, just go out
Uh-huh.
any just 10 minutes out.
Yeah.
And of course, well, I'm not going to get into politics because I was going to
Mm,
say that's somebody's territory. Who's
mm-hmm.
going to be debating this tonight?
Right, exactly, exactly. So you've already kind of touched on it, but I do want to go ahead and just ask the question and mention that some women of color do not recognize the power of their voices.
Hmm.
What would you like to tell those who perceive themselves to be voiceless?
Yes. So the first thing is really to do that self reflection and introspection time with yourself, and try to uh, really check in and see where have you been successful. And I would say, even not with me, but to have somebody as someone that you could touch bases with, because sometimes the way we see ourselves show up is not the way we show up. And so we might have this idea about who we are. We have those little voices telling us stuff, that whole imposter syndrome.
Mm,
And other people might not see you that way. They might see you in a very different, positive way. So I think it's really to do that interest. I think it's very important to do introspection and to really think about how you want to show up, and then check it in with other folks. And then to really think about your successes, right? I really feel that if they put their whole self to work and they find an area where they like, I love what I'm doing, and even if I'm tired, I'm going to try to do my best. I think we still have to work very hard, and I think we can we need someone to help us get that confidence to say, yeah, this is, you're showing up in a good way. So I always think about a buddy or someone that has your back, is important. And then to be open to listening, and sometimes it might be difficult to hear what someone has to say, but again, they see this. We don't see our own blind spots. We need
mm-hmm.
someone else to see it, and then I think, to educate ourselves, to read about the models that we have of people, of women, Black women who have made significant contributions, because that for me is very inspiring, to see, and
Absolutely.
we don't get that education very often. So to read and to get educated on who went before us, because we have a lot of very good she heroes, that we owe who we are today to them. But I really think the important thing is you have to believe it in yourself, and you have to have someone that you can bounce some ideas that can help guide you. But I want everybody to realize that we all have the power, and not to allow anything or anyone to say differently. I mean, it's not that we want permission to be in the room. We belong in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have something to offer. And to really say it to yourself. I always, when I'm coaching, I give people mantras to stick it on in the mirror in the bathroom, keep saying it more and more, say it in the morning, say it, and to journal. I think we
Yes.
sometimes do not realize the successes, and they could be small little successes, but we need to journal what went on today. And then we could go back and see some of the trends, and we might surprise ourselves, right? So I think those things, I think you need someone to help you see who you are, because sometimes we're so stuck that we don't see it. So we need someone to help us see that, and then to help us get our voice. But yeah, journaling and meditating and the affirmations, and then producing and putting your hand up. And then if it doesn't, you're not called on, not in the meeting, because again, we don't want to humiliate, but then off site, say, I was just wondering of what went on there because I had a contribution to make and it wasn't heard. But when my colleague next to me said it, everybody said, "Wow, that's a fantastic idea."
Right.
So let's talk about what are some of the things I need to do for you to see me for who I am. That kind of a conversation. And I know it's hard sometimes. That's why you have to practice with somebody else. And then I tell people to be an ally. Like if you see that happening to someone often, then for you to speak up and say,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, I think Deneen just said that. Deneen, can you repeat that again?" And make sure not to repeat it, to make sure that her voice is heard in the meeting. So we can be allies and speak up and help others be seen. I think it's very
Yeah.
important.
Absolutely. So that last point that you made, Amber Hikes, you may be familiar with her. She's
Hmm.
actually the Chief Diversity Officer of ACLU. But 2 years ago, I was introduced to her at Out and Equal Summit, and she talked about signal boosting, which is pretty much what you just described.
Hmm.
When you hear a woman saying something, you kind of come back behind. Yes, Josy just
Hmm.
made a very great point. Or no, I heard Josy say that. Or,
Hmm.
oh, I think Josy is trying to say something. And we absolutely have to do that for one another. I
Hmm.
wanted to kind of go back to when you said talking to other people and kind of seeing you the way they see you is so very important. I had a couple conversations where people had said some things to me, and then when I sat back and reflected, I'm like, you know what? That is a catch up to the vision moment. So these
Mm.
people had said something like, I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, had you considered doing this? So they were talking about how I can take this, what I'm doing,
Mhm.
to the
Mhm.
next level, leveling up with it. Or, hey, how
Mhm.
about this? How about that? And I'm like, oh my God,
Mm.
that is
Mhm.
catching up to the vision. So they see the vision or they see what's around the corner for me that I don't quite
That
see
you
yet.
don't see, right?
And it's up to
Mhm.
me to catch up to it.
Right?
so
Yep. Yep.
so you are spot on with that. So I appreciate that. So as we begin to wrap, what final words would you like to leave with our listeners?
Well, I just want to say you're all wonderful. Spread your wonderfulness. And then for my Afro Latina sisters,
Yeah.
we have to go out there and show everyone how great we are and be proud of your culture. Leverage your culture in an organization at work. I mean, show people how you can be the leaders that you are. Most of the time, we're leaders at home. We're
Mm,
leaders in different aspects of our lives. And one of the things that I do in career coaching is to help them see what are they doing outside of work, because sometimes people at work don't even know that you're doing these things. So they only see you as one way, right? At work, and they don't realize that outside of work you're leading your PTA, and you're at your church being a leader. At home you're making all the decisions. So those are leadership skills that you need to make sure other people know.
mm-hmm.
But I say, pa'lante, go forward, and tenemos el poder. We have the power to make it happen, and just be proud of who you are. We have a lot of richness as Afro Latina, as a Latina, that people don't even know about, and a lot of people actually are very curious and hungry to learn and want, and particularly in our day and age, our skills are so sought after. I mean, this is longer than a parting words, but I was just thinking about when I started, I didn't do, at the time, all my colleagues were doing an MBA. And I decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get my master's in French and Spanish lit. And who would have told me that? So that's not the normal path, right? Who would
Right.
have told me that I now can use it in the corporate world? Because I do cultural competencies, I do workshops in Spanish and in French. And I wouldn't have even known, I wasn't even thinking of that when I first got into it, and I knew I sometimes had second thoughts because everybody was getting their MBA and I only had my MA. But I made it work, and that's what I'm telling you. Make it work. Figure out what
Yes.
is it that you could bring to the party and make it work. Have them see it as a bottom line application, and that you can leverage what you bring, not only the book knowledge, but you and your experience, to wherever you are, whether it's a profit or a nonprofit organization.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Because all that extra, it makes you unique. It makes you stand out. And it's
yes,
things that you can put on your resume, right? Because people get caught and think, oh, I had to have done that in a job. No, you don't.
right,
It's
exactly.
experience, and you get experience in different ways. So make sure that you're tapping into that. So, Josy Laza Gallagher, I have tremendous enjoyed this conversation. I have learned so much. Like I said, I sat back because I'm like, I want to learn. I want to know more about that. And and there's still lots that we could talk about and lots of questions, from a cultural aspect. But
Hmm.
we'll get back together at another time. I'll do a little bit of reading on Orisha, and I'll reach out to you and just connect. But again, I want to thank you so much for your
You're
sisterhood, for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
great. I appreciate. I'm humbled to be here with you, and I really appreciate sharing this time. I felt like it was an intimate chat. So thank you for setting that up, and you have a great day.